right, thank you very much. So again, thank you everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. We had a restful spring break, and we have quite a lot to talk about tonight. We are fortunate to have I would say, I guess less than 6 months is still new. The new Chief Equity Officer, Dr. Lisa Williams, is going to talk to us. Then we're going to have a discussion about social emotional learning. We're going to break out into some smaller groups to kind of reflect on what we hear and talk about. And then at the end, we're going to discuss information that was sent in a letter from the NAACP that went out sometime last week. Let's see. So actually, you know what? So I guess, Dr. Williams, do you have slides or anything to share?
Mike, yes, Dr. Williams has slides to share. We kind of reorganized the schedule due to some meetings this afternoon.
Okay.
Can we go ahead and get started with Mary Jo?
That's fine. From Social Work Services, we have Mary Jo Davis, who's the coordinator.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I really appreciate. I know that. Hi, Andre. I know that it's really. My heart is really to the core of really working with our Title I schools and supporting all the meaningful work that's going on. Wanted to give you an update where we are right now in the division and overarching on the social emotional learning that's going on in Fairfax County. But I want to ground us a minute to really a mindful moment. I came across this clip when I was, we have a lot of work that we do in our office, in our social work office, and we're really working deeply into the supporting our social workers with advanced learning on the equity work, as well as supporting the social emotional supports that they do in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 work in their schools. So I really think this clip, when I showed it then, also fits very fittingly today with the agenda, because we embarked on this when we were doing further social emotional learning together as a large office. And I wanted to acknowledge that this is, this year and has been very challenging times. So along with our learning and our focus on the social emotional learning of our students and adults, even in the building, that it's a good reminder and important about the importance of our relationships and connections. Despite the health pandemic and the crisis we've occurred, any circumstances, there are always people that bring that guiding gratitude and hope in every situation. We showed this clip, like I said, and it was really a very meaningful reflection. I also think, Maya Angelou has been one of my lifelong learners and inspiration for the dedicated service work that I do in the school division, as well in my community. And I think it's really, she's an inspirational in her words in learning how we are supporting students, families, as we embark to the social emotional time together in our school communities. So as you listen to this clip, I do want you to just be thoughtful and think thoughtful in your, intentional in your listening, but I also want you to reflect on who are your supports and how this can be impactful in this quick video clip of Maya Angelou. So I'm going to thank you guys for putting that up for me. And I think we need the sound. Is there a reason? Let me see. Thank you. Oh, You might have to go into your computer in.
Yeah, you have to stop sharing. You have to stop sharing and then click the audio button and then share.
Right. So me stop. Okay. Or no. There you go.
There's an African American song, 19th century, which is so great. It says, when it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Imagine. And I've had so many rainbows in my clouds. I had a lot of clouds, but I have had so many rainbows. And one of the things I do when I step up on a stage, when I stand up to translate, when I go to teach my classes, when I go to direct a movie, I bring everyone who has ever been kind to me with me. Black, white, Asian, Spanish speaking, Native American, gay, straight, everybody. I say, come with me. I'm going on the stage. Come with me, I need you now. Long dead, you see? So I don't ever feel I have no help. I've had rainbows in my clouds. And the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. Somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all. You see? I may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. That's what I think.
Grammarly.
Thank you. I find as we reflect in that grounds me every time I listen to that piece. It grounded me when we showed this clip in the beginning of our SEL learning as a group of some of the continued ways we support our students. And every time I listen to it, I just find another meaningful way that we what we do, and it grounds me to really the important basic need of how we have to build supports around us. And everyone in every school and every student, it's a collective impact. It's never just one person. So I hope you enjoyed that clip. I'm going to move on just to give a grounding definition of what social emotional learning is. This really is the definition by Castle. In our work, as we continue to embark social emotional, we are in conjunction with Virginia Department of Education adopting the Castle tenets and the Castle framework in supporting our social emotional learning for our students and in our schools. The Castle definition and framework really helps us to reflect on our continuous learning from SEL research, practice, and policy. So it's really around the process through which all our children and young people and adults in the building acquire that knowledge set, the skills, to really lead and develop healthy identities, how to manage emotions, and how to have that personal and collective goals for themselves. It also, for our students and our adults, helps show and look on continued building upon empathy for others, building on establishing and maintaining those deep supported relationships, and how we make everyone responsible and support that as a collective impact to our caring decisions. SEL really has that 4 really components that I'm going to talk about today. It's a very framework, if you think of it, has a supportive environment starting first with the student at the center. So it really helps us to advance that educational equity and the excellence through authentic school, family, and community partnerships by establishing the learning relationships and giving those places and spaces where social emotional learning can be exemplified, promoted, and supported. So it's infusing all that into our curriculum and in our instruction. Also looking at how we do that as a community. Again, we think about the collective impact to this framework for our out of school time in
Mary Jo,
our,
Mary Jo,
yes.
let me just stop.
Yes.
We have an interpreter on, and I do this all the time.
Oh,
Can you just
I'm
make
so
sure you take,
sorry.
can you just make sure you take pauses in between so they have a chance? I'm sorry, not saying
Thank you, Mike. No, I appreciate it. Sorry. So it's a framework, again, if you think of social emotional learning to support not only just instruction time, but in our communities, in our out of school time. And it really is about this CASEL framework is really about the framework of the ongoing work and the assessment for continuous improvement. So what is the CASEL framework? There's a lot in this slide, and I really want to focus a lot primarily in this slide, starting from the center. If you look at the center going out. CASEL's definition really focuses and strengthens the adult social emotional learning competencies in their capacity. So teachers, any adult instructional supports, to support students for promoting their social emotional learning and tenets and skills of the wheel that you see of the teaching and intentional teaching instructions around those 5 tenets that I'll get into. So as you can see, social emotional learning really helps to support. It can be a power leverage for supporting and creating that caring, just, and inclusive, healthy community. CASEL is also a very supportive way to support. I think it's on the chat. It's collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. So again, I always emphasize that collaborative for academic, social, emotional learning, and the acronym is CASEL. The key component is the collaborative and the rings that you see of support around that. So you're welcome. So CASEL really, I'm going to give you this definition and just read slowly. Their definition is social emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. It's the process through which all children and young people and adults acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage their emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals. So let's go through a little bit more of what we're doing in our office, all our offices, and what we've been doing this year. So the pandemic has really helped us in one way. I think we've collectively become very focused on how we support and do that work. So we have an inter-office work group, and that is from intervention prevention services, all offices, social work, psychology, counseling. We have representatives from instructional services, and we also have personnel with out-of-school supports. What they've done this year is to really be intentional about that developmental CASEL lessons that I spoke about a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit further here, to have teams support that Tier 1 instruction on those tenets of self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. Those are the core components and tenets of skill set that we teach the students and support curriculum around. So those lessons were pushed out this year. Social workers, psychologists, counselors kind of pushed into classrooms to support that. And then they also helped to create, everyone through the CASTLE framework, professional development. And there was modules within our professional MyPDE for school personnel to learn more about the CASTLE. Yep, collaborative for academic, social, emotional learning. So there's 5-part modules that all personnel can, teachers, any personnel can learn about the CASTLE and the process of teaching and framework of teaching and supporting social emotional learning. The work group also developed an internet website with tools, supports, resource banks of ideas to support schools with this work. And for the summer, they're in development right now for these SEL lessons supports to provide content and packets for summer school. They also are in development right now for next school year's lessons. Again, that they can go in, pull out the support of the kind of package for them SEL lessons that go to push into the classrooms and are available to all. So looking ahead again to next year, just to know, many of you may have heard about the SEL screener that is in process to be purchased and moving along for hopefully by next year will be available. Sorry, not hopefully, will be chosen the vendor by next year for next school year. So, and I want to also highlight how much that social emotional learning, we think about that in the multi-tiered system of support lens. The Tier 1 practices has been going on in all schools, and that's various programming from Ruler, Mind Up, Positivity Project. So many schools have various different Tier 1 school-wide practices that all students get. Also, targeted Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions have been in this system where social workers, psychologists, counselors go and work with selective students to enhance that skill set. And it's targeted interventions that they're working with on evidence-based programs to develop those skills based on more support that maybe is needed. Within that framework of CASTLE is our trauma-informed also school practices, which really is an approach to foster and support the students' social emotional learning. So it's really the practices within the school building that we've started and talked about and worked with our Title I schools very closely to build that trauma-sensitive school practices out. So what are those 5 big, broad CASTLE tenets that we talk about? So again, I will always talk about the rings. And if you look at, we're starting in the center, think of that social emotional learning bullet in the center, or target in the center is the student. So the 5 broad interrelated areas are that self-awareness curriculum that we're helping our students learn, developmentally appropriate levels around self-awareness skill sets. So the CASTLE can be taught and applied at all developmental stages, from childhood to adulthood, and across all cultural contents. Many school districts and states really look to CASTLE to establish those standards and competencies with articulating what students should know and be able to do once they're for academic success, for civic engagement, for health and wellness, and also for their fulfilling careers as adults. So what are those skill sets? What do they teach? Just to give you a little bit summary, the self-awareness is more on that identifying thoughts, feelings, strengths, and recognizing how they influence one's choices and actions. The next orange part of the wheel is around self-management, and that's establishing and a working toward short and long-term goals, handling emotions, so those, and also looking at how they can facilitate rather than interfere with the task at hand with their emotions. The yellow wheel, the yellow part of the internal wheel, is responsible decision making. And that's generating and implementing and evaluating more that informed solutions to problem solving and helping students have that problem solving skill set and to assume the responsibility for their own decisions and their behaviors. Onto the green parts of the wheel are the relationship skills. And in the relationship skills are communication, listening, negotiating, skills, establishing and maintaining healthy, rewarding connections to individuals and groups. And the social awareness is really looking at being competent to our supporting our social awareness in our classrooms, in our communities, in our relationships crossover, but in our how we have the social awareness of others around us. Social awareness also helps with identifying thoughts and feelings of others, respecting their rights, and also appreciating the diversity within our communities. So when we have all these tenets together and are teaching these skill sets to students, so when the social emotional skills are mastered, they really think about helping our students not only succeeding in school, right, but in all avenues of life. I'm going to try to go through these a little bit faster so I don't run out of time. If you think of when you heard me talk a little bit about the social emotional, CASEL social emotional skill set, you really can see the intersection between that and the portrait of graduate. And so I did put some really good handouts below that might show that deeper and further, that you can feel free to click on the hyperlink and then have those handouts for you. But those are really tenets of a portrait of a graduate. And BDOE, our Department of Education, also really breaks it down, and I have that on resource on the last page, that further of how our portrait of a graduate and CASEL competencies are very aligned together. So key settings, what's really important to look at in the framework of our key settings are, again, as I said, those rings, right? So now I talked a little bit about the students learning. Let's look at the rings for the framework in CASEL further out. The competencies of these skill sets that are being taught explicitly to students cannot be taught in a vacuum. Our learning is never taught in a vacuum. That it really is shaped and supported by our interactions and our relationships and the environment that we live in. So this is why I think those rings, if you look at the key setting in those rings going out, CASEL's framework also stresses the importance of the settings in those authentic school, family, and community partnerships, and how to coordinate those practices across all those learning environments. Schools are very integral in the center to supporting that work. So if we look at school, the second ring, obviously, is that we want to build that foundational plan, right? That foundational supportive plan, and have that collective social emotional learning tenets, and making that we are aligning these resources and supporting those in an ongoing commitment way. And that because the school setting, it really is both the hallways, our classrooms, our cafeterias, all those pieces are important to the tenet of supporting that social emotional learning environment for the student and that engagement for them. And it's strengthened by the adult SEL's competencies and capacity for cultivating those trusted relationships with students and in the community to support that social emotional learning. It's important that we promote that social emotional learning by a coordinated approach to all this, that we are across the classrooms, that not only we're across to the classrooms, different varying classrooms within the school building, but also coordinated to the school and the homes and in the communities that our students live in, and how we are supporting that work. And it's really important that we also look on the other piece that's very important in the school aspect, is that we are consciously looking at continuous data and continuous kind of reflection to the outcomes, and that should guide us in our decisions to process improvements or to further improvements with social emotional instruction that we're giving in social emotional environments. Our family and caregivers are very, as we know, the research suggests that that they're extremely aligned in an important part to that effective partnership. So that SEL programs are more effective only when they extend out to the home, and when that communication is going fluidly between the student and the teacher in the classrooms and within the school and out to the family and homes. And we know that a lot of the curriculum actually supports that in giving the feedback and supporting. Actually, I can think of, like, when I was in school, I would continuously work with maybe a tier 2 program and give actually a packet sometimes to families to say, can you reinforce the skill set that I'm teaching your child today, that I'm teaching your child and supporting on. And they would have the homework packet as well within the curriculum that I was teaching. So that partnership is key in supporting the students acquiring that skill set. And that we really know that families and caregivers that schools need the inclusive, process of that decision making to ensure that the families have that, particularly for our marginalized groups, sometimes our marginalized families, in support of the planning, implementation, and the improvement of our social emotional learning for students. Communities. So the communities are also very essential and integral to the process of this. We know that our communities, without having strong partnerships, without having the strong supports through our community partnerships that we have, that this is also an integral part of that ring and support to making sure that we have strong social emotional learning. So our out of school time providers and our before and after school program providers are essential to the work, to support that work. I know there's in our office we have a lot of support to working with our neighborhood and community services partners, our centers. We actually do some similar programming in our office to make sure that we have a MOU to provide mentoring. So some of the centers and the adults in those communities are providing that check and connect model. We do the training because we've been trained by that model out of Minneapolis. They have that framework of check and connect, and that is really important to support actually cross systems of that social emotional learning. So some of those partners, again, are listed up there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but definitely our community county partners, our nonprofit partners are very strong in how we support the work together. Our businesses, as well as our faith leaders in their universities. These are all partnerships that we would want to continue to look at and foster within this framework. So on this slide, they're hyperlinks more for resources for you guys to click on and to learn more. CASEL did across the division, this nation provided that I put the link on there, the roadmap for reopening schools, because a lot of this past year has been very challenging for a lot of our schools as we navigated and shifted from virtual learning to hybrid to support concurrent, so it's been a lot of shifting and moving parts. I found this roadmap very useful and helpful as we are doing our programming and supporting students back in the building. This is also a list of some of the CASEL competencies that I wanted to put out there from their website and from VDOE. VDOE is also a Virginia Department that has aligning again, making this framework and having resources. Currently, they're actually putting videos together, which we are partnering with them and other school divisions. Of course, I have a very close supervisor that once used to be in our offices up there, so I feel like we have a strong relationship with Virginia Department of Education and their student services, which is wonderful. POG is Portrait of a Graduate. So it's wonderful to have that relationships. I really feel, again, it's all about relationships, connections, connectivity, making sure we have strong partnerships and doing this work together. So please feel free to try to put as many resources for you there. And I'm happy to take some questions and open it up unless the forum is, I see that you guys are going to have breakout sessions, so I don't know if you wanted to have the opening or that time for questions here first. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Hi, Mary Jo. We're gonna, our next section will be with Dr. Williams, so,
Okay,
and then
great.
we'll break out to groups.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Dr. Williams, whenever you're ready.
I am here. Good afternoon, good evening, rather. Let me get my camera on. Yeah. And it actually is a good idea that I was able to follow Mary Jo in such a thorough explanation of the CASEL framework, because I actually want to approach it, this discussion, not from the level of the classroom, but really from the level of the practitioner, be it the educator or the leader. And so I just want to have us locate even our discussion tonight, even in the context of today, right? Because often when in school districts, we get new frameworks to use in classrooms, we oftentimes don't think about what they mean for the organization, right? So if we want our students to have social emotional intelligence and capacity and skill, the question is, the antecedent question is, what is our level of our own social and emotional awareness? And are we applying a deficit ideology that would suggest that students don't have a thing without reflection about the degree to which we embodied these ideas? And what I would submit before getting into this presentation, although I don't even know that we need the slides this evening because I kind of want to just talk about things, what I submit is, in order for SEL as a framework to be something more than words on a page, it has deep implications for work that we must do as educators in terms of building our own capacity to just be in our persons, right? And so what do I mean by that? I mean, even right now, today was a pretty significantly consequential day in the lives of many people on this call, in the lives of our community, right? And whether you are close up on the situation of the Derek Chauvin trial or more distal, meaning it's not then something that populates your consciousness, if you are an educator, that we're not interacting with students or communities that don't have that kind of choice and variation in their connectivity, has everything to do with this conversation. And if we don't put a lived experience, a humanity around SEL as a framework, then we miss its intended purpose, which I would submit is to really have us think about teaching and learning and engagement beyond just the cognitive domain. Because the reality is, we teach culture, right? We socialize before we do anything related to that cognition that we tend to think that most of the work is centered around. And so one of the things that I like to have folks consider, and this is not a new idea, but certainly it is Maslow before Bloom. It is the social emotional conditions for learning before that deep and rigorous engagement that can be transformational in lives of students and, quite frankly, in the lives of adults can happen. So what are the social conditions that are present for that type of engagement. And so if we had more time, I do have a video because I like to make the connection between the work of Dr. Nadine Burke, who did a good amount of research around ACEs and otherwise known as adverse childhood experiences, and our need to actually have a social emotional framing as a way to ensure that those needs are met before we try to jump into that deep dive, so that we can get to that kind of engagement that we offer as the most rigorous, right? But even that exists in a frame. It exists in a frame of identity, and that's where I would like us to sort of sit and think about some of these ideas. So as Mary Jo shared, one of the using the CASTLE framework, and most people do use the CASTLE framework across the country. If we layer on a lens of equity, or we layer on a lens of anti-racism, we ask ourselves different questions as practitioners, which again then lead us to ask different questions of our students. It causes us to think about the learning environment and how to curate that learning environment in a different way. So the first question that I would ask of the folks on this call is, as you think about your own sense of self-awareness, right? Where in your person are you finding yourself? Where's your presence right now in this moment? Anybody want to share? As you think about this idea of like in your body, in your person right now, what are the sensations? What are the thoughts in your head? What is your awareness of your person in this moment? Thoughts?
Do you mean regarding the verdict in the trial, or just like 7:39 p.m. on Tuesday?
I love it. Just 7:39, and like if 7:39 for you is the verdict in the trial, or it has some different meaning, whatever is present for you and your own level of presence in this moment, what is sitting with you about your person?
I would never have imagined that. Let's see, it's April 20th. So I wouldn't have imagined a year and a half ago, I guess the last time we had an in-person meeting, that I would be conducting this and so many others. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. Prime time has become like 7 to 9 and you're in front of a computer screen, not a TV anymore. I never would have thought that became a way of those who have the privilege to do so. Because there's a lot of people who have to work outside of their home. They can't be in front of a computer, may not have multiple or even one computer. So, but in my space, because I don't want to speak for anyone else, it's that. How did this become my life? It's like I work all day on a computer, and now on nighttime it just segues. It's like an after party that doesn't end early.
Well, after parties are not supposed to end early, but but
Sorry,
I take
not
your
an after party. After party would have. I don't drink on TPAC meeting calls, so not an after party. Not an.
I'm not, and there will be no persons disparaged on this call. But if I could, thank you for sharing that. If I could lift up what I heard you say, right, which is for you, there's a lot of reflection about, what has changed in life from last year to this year, right? And what it means to spend as much time as we find ourselves even on a computer. Now, mind you, there are many of us who are doing those same things, but we're not reflecting on it. And this is what I mean about this question of self-awareness is not just about how self-aware our students are, or our children are. So much of that is going to be emblematic of what we model, right? And because this is like, good reading strategies. So what we know is that good readers are often doing things that are imperceivable to students who struggle, so we do read alouds, we do think alouds, so that they get a sense of what that schema looks like. I want to submit that this is the same thing, that if we want our students to develop those social emotional muscles, right, we've got to be able to unpack our processes and then engage them into the type of dialogue that calls them into presence of themselves, right? So I talked to my son about his presence presence of his person, noticing when, sensations that he has when his body is moving through space. He's longer, he has longer limbs, right? Just calling him to awareness of his presence. He's 4 years old. And as he gets older, right, and in his gender identity, in his racial identity, in the different ways he's received in his body, where's that place where he gets to talk that through and process it so that he is making meaning and having some awareness of identity that is not just how he sees himself, but certainly how he is processing that stimuli about how the world sees him. And so again, the degree to which I can engage him, the degree to which we can engage students, has everything to do with the degree to which we are thinking about these things ourselves. I saw another hand.
Nina?
No, that was my mistake. That was the hand of, a mom who's trying to prepare the iftar dinner in in less than 10 minutes. So I am very present in this meeting, but that was actually by accident. So forgive me for that.
Oh, no worries. Jen, I see your hand.
You're asking about my name?
No. I saw Jenna White had a hand up. I wasn't
Oh.
sure if she wanted to share.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I'm just a guest at this meeting, so I hope it's okay to jump in. But I guess I'm thinking about, in terms of what you were saying and then Mary Jo's presentation, what struck out to me is the part about thinking about decision-making processes on the individual level, and it makes me think about the fact that I have the opportunity in many situations where I can make a decision, and a lot of times there's situations where other people don't even have that opportunity to make a decision, and that might be based on race, but it might also be based on, a child. Just by nature of being a child or a student, we don't often allow them to be in a power structure where we tell them to make good decisions, but it's not within the context of having that relationship or that power sharing where they do feel like they're in a place to make a decision. So just the ability to make your own decisions is something that I think we can think about for ourselves and all those rings of our school and our community and each other.
And thank you for that, because you're helping me to accelerate, like, moving through the tenets, because you're lifting up the point that I want to submit is so critically important to making this framework do something that is not destructive. Because here's the thing. If I am doing identity work in all of the ways in which identity matters, to include age, right, and power associated with age and position, and power associated or disassociated with position, then as I am having those conversations, I am bearing those things in mind. If what it is that I'm providing coaching or counsel to students, right, in a colorblind way, and what I mean is in a way that doesn't acknowledge that not all bodies are valued equally, not all bodies are treated equally, not all voices are heard in the same way, then I could be implementing this framework, but am I implementing the framework in a way that is operative in the life of that child? So it is not enough to understand these tenets, absent that work that is around identity and thinking about the ways in which power imbalances exist in the larger environment, right? Which is, for me, the intersection between this framework and why it is we should be thinking about intersectional racial equity as we are providing coaching and counsel, because bodies are not treated the same, they're not afforded the same opportunities, right? And if what it is that we want our students to ultimately be able to do is to navigate the world, right, then the complexity of these ideas and helping them to make sense of them in ways that empower and see broader pictures than oftentimes they are contending with only happens when we dig in and wrestle with some of the realities that are oftentimes painful that we would otherwise not even contend with if left to our own devices. And again, I use this moment, I use this evening as an example of that, right? This question of how we on this call be together when some of us are supremely distracted for a whole range of reasons with what's happening in the environment outside of this call where others of us have the ability to attend fully, right? And how do we be together honoring those differences, such that everybody finds space? So this is, from my perspective, how you begin to really intersect this work around Castle that has great possibility to create more conduits for learning and engagement, for all of our learners, but especially learners who need to be seen and connected with than what we've had in the way of tools prior to using these kinds of frames. So I want to stop here and invite some thoughts, and I'll move again expeditiously through the slides.
Dr. Williams, I want to remind we have an interpreter on, so if you could break up a little as you're talking, just to give them time. Thanks.
No worries. And one of the things that I would submit is one of the PowerPoints of this model is that it actually does matter how students feel, what they think, and what they experience as we think about the task of getting them engaged and conversant with curriculum. And this is a way, not the only way, but it is a way to frame or create space to acknowledge that as a conduit for learning. So I like to quote James Baldwin because one of the things that he says that feels especially relevant to me in this moment, thank you, go back one slide, is if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see. And when it is that we want our young folks to be self-aware, when we want them to be reflective decision makers, when we want them to be responsible in relationships, all of these ideas that live in the Castle framework, the antecedent question for me is always, to what degree have we done that work and are showing up as models so that they might see the different ways that this kind of framing can show up on bodies. So I want to stop. Ms. Davis Smith, I see your hand.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So if we're going to talk about our reality today and now, do you have any understanding or awareness of either the school board or your own plan to address the events of today, and specifically the verdict and what that means in our society?
So, I mean, if this were a different meeting, if we had more time, we could certainly talk about the things that the division does from the equity office's perspective to support the division. But I will say this, I know I just got a text that I need to slow down. But I will say this, the work to move forward from this moment is organizational work and it's overtime work. The first of which is just processing. So certainly we want to go from circumstances like this to resolutions that help us to be past this moment. But I would submit, Ms. Davis Smith, that my first invitation is for us to all process like what this experience has meant for us and where we believe that the organization should go as a consequence. So that would be my immediate response to your query.
And so you may see that my hand's still up. My son's 12 and 7 process real time. Do you know if the school board or anybody in your organization plans to address this at all tomorrow?
I'm with you all this evening, so there are 1,000 things that could be going on in my email, but I am trying to be present with you this afternoon. I'm pretty certain that the answer is yes, but again, trying to be personally accountable for being in this place. I would tell you that I am with you this evening, and I'm certainly thinking of these things with you this evening.
I appreciate that. I am able to address my son's questions. I've gotten texts from friends from all ethnicities in support. I didn't even know. People started hitting me up before I had a chance to look at the news. And so I know that, my kids are going to see it soon. They're, virtual learning still. It doesn't come up before that. It's going to somehow inadvertently come out. And I just wanted to encourage you all to have some type of, dialogue, statement, something for the teachers to say something, because even my second grader knows about George Floyd. And the fact that this impacted the entire world. I was just saying to a colleague who is East Indian, Japan had protests. Korea had protests. The people in Syria found one block that was still in one piece to spray paint George Floyd's picture. And it's difficult. I understand real-time response is difficult with an organization the size of Fairfax County Public Schools, but I mean, especially post-pandemic or during pandemic, I want to emphasize how important it is for the message to get out sooner than later. And I will rest with that. Thank you.
Yep. Nope, I appreciate your truth. There's a moment, there's a time when silence is violence, right? And I think that, this has been a seminal moment in our collective community. And so voicing for our children, voicing for ourselves, voicing for our own humanity is a part of what the moment calls for. So I appreciate what you're lifting up, and trust me, I heard and received. Mike?
I do want to say, though, regarding any statement or whatever message comes out, I think it needs to be really clear that this is a message that says, this is how the system is supposed to work. It'll probably make me madder than one that doesn't say anything, or, the reason why is because this was such an overuse of resources and time and effort. It's confirmation of our senses. Can we see? Can we hear? And it's kind of like if you've seen a movie, for those who've seen, I don't know, Avengers, Star Wars, whatever. Did Luke get his hand cut off? Did Hulk beat up Loki? It's not really debatable. It's not a controversy. So with things that are going on within this school system, which is racist because of its outcomes, because of what it produces, because of what happens to students and families, I think it just has to be, if there is going to be something, it needs to be very measured, and by no means try to make it sound like anything is over, anything close to over, any victory, anything like that. A man was murdered on camera, and that will be forever in this archive of this nation's memory. And there is nothing to be happy about. It's just something to be less upset about.
Mm-hmm. And so thank you. I want to actually hold those two comments, because I think that this conversation illustrates why I think that this is about adults before it's about children, because those two comments uplifted the same concern, right? The concern of this moment, but were framed in two different ways. And so the question is often, right, how do I manage myself when I am with people who see the world in ways that are different than how I see the world, how I experience the world, so that we might go to a deeper place on behalf of children. That's typically the context in schools, right? Now, the two comments that were advanced were framed similarly, but perspectives were different from me, from my perspective as the hearer. So self-management, and if we lifted this up and had adults think about how they show up for young people as emblematic of being able to manage challenges, being able to manage conflict, right? Oftentimes, we are the most conflict averse, right? We are the most quick to shut down discussions that bring some discourse. We don't get to the best product, because to get to that best product has to involve some task conflict. And so this question of self-management is not just, when things are easy, when we agree, when the task is relatively uncomplicated, but when the issues are nuanced. Do we speak out now? How quickly do we speak out? What is the message? How do we frame it? Do we use it in a historical context? Do we talk about gaslighting? Do we talk about the violence that there were some people who were even worried of what the verdict would be? Like all of that, and how do I manage myself as I wade through that discussion? This is the adult version of SEL, right? And when we've not figured out how to work through these things in ways, again, that present themselves for us every day as teachers, as leaders, as colleagues, as parents, then all of the power of what we would have for our young people around actualizing this framework gets sacrificed. So I think it's really important. And again, I'm going to be, I thought I had 15 minutes and I know I'm going long, but now I'm slowing down because I think I'm talking too fast. What I do want to lift up is they're from a framing of equity and an intersecting frame of equity with SEL, the larger environment that the ideas are existing in, and modeled in, and then coached, right? Coached in terms of our engagement with students around. Like, those are deeply consequential to having these ideas be more than words on a page. So there is a video that I will make sure you have access to by Nadine Burke. It's a TED Talk that you can watch at your leisure. But when I put this presentation together a while ago, there was the issue. I am from Baltimore. So at that time, we were talking about the circumstances around the death of Freddie Gray. And 5 years later, we're having, or however many years later it's been now we're having this conversation about George Floyd. So again, what is my awareness of the social context that really creates the ecosystem for my students? But more importantly, what is my level of awareness of my own social location, of my own identity? And the more spaces in which we sit in identities that are dominant, the harder it is to see that social identity as having meaning in a world that makes the way in which those bodies get treated such that it's not perceivable that your identities have meaning. Heterosexual folks very infrequently think about their sexual orientation because the world is not crafted such that you would have to think about it often. Able-bodied folks very infrequently think about what it means to be able-bodied in a world that is crafted for able-bodied people. And we could go through a whole list of identities and notice the way that dominance gets organized and structured into the fabric of a society in such a way that my level of social awareness about my identity is not as present as it needs to be if I'm going to be in partnership with someone else and helping them to think through theirs. And I will just say this, again, being mindful of time, there is something especially destructive for me to sit in a privileged identity in relationship with someone who does not enjoy those societal privileges and coach that person about how to make sense of their world through that lens. But again, that's a conversation for when we have more time. So some specific things, like what do I know about race? What do I know about class? What do I know about the experience of my students? And then how do those things all translate into our ability to be in relationship? And if we had more time, we would talk about the relationships that we have.
Williams, you can go till about 8:10, 8:15.
Okay, well, that's perfect, because then I can stop and make opportunities available for folks to ask questions. But this issue of relationship skills, and let me pause real quick. Am I doing better with speed? Because I know there's an interpreter. I don't want to. So I'm going to take that silence as a yes. Thank you, Leona. So, too fast though? Okay. All right. I'll try to slow down. This is a result of a lot of caffeine at 8 o'clock at night. But what I would say around relational skills is it is really across lines of difference, across ways of experiencing the world that are divergent, right? My ability to be in relationships broadly informs the degree to which our young people are given opportunities in the classroom to experience similar things, right? So one of the ways that this manifests itself is our relationship with even ideas like academic ability. If I've only experienced what I might call giftedness as a host of young people who show up not needing a lot of help from the teacher, or being independent and able to complete work without a lot of prompting, then I have a pretty singular myopic view on what a gifted child who that gifted child might be, right? And the relationships that I've had reinforce that, right? So then, if giftedness should show up in a different way, what relationships have I had outside of that context that would allow me to know that giftedness can lend itself and be in spaces where coaching is needed, or giftedness can be in spaces outside of ones that we would consider as classically academic. This and this is about relationships, right? Because relationships are not just, connections to people, but it's also connection to ideas, especially for us as instructors, right? And one of the examples that I love lifting up is how we think about colleges and universities, right? We often talk about places where academic ability exists in terms of Ivy League colleges and universities. That's the relationship that we associate with where rigor exists, not recognizing all of the ways in which historically Black colleges and universities and other institutions that are not historically dominant, right, contribute to so much of how we experience productivity across a whole range of identities outside of that dominant narrative. And so our relationship to even a question of where opportunities exist, right, that becomes one of these things that gets called into question when we actually lean into the development of our own social emotional awareness and learning. And so, to the extent that we think about these tenets that are put forth by Castle, not just as what is it that I want in the classroom, but also who do I need to be to create this environment in the classroom? Who do I need to be to create and build these ways of being and capacities with my child or in my family, or more broadly in my community? That I impugn myself in the conversation, that I impugn my colleagues or call my colleagues into the conversation. This is how this framework can then change the learning environment in ways that are much more humanistic and, quite frankly, much more inclusive. So I will close with this statement from James Comer, a preeminent psychologist who says that no significant learning can happen without significant relationship. And then there are a couple of videos that did not come through. I'll make sure that you all get access to them. They're pretty interesting because this video that is not included here actually showed what solid relationships can look like with students and teachers when the teacher has skills in being relational. Because as James Baldwin put forward, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so, again, when I make the connection between Mary Jo's discussion of what it is that we are doing in classrooms, I am hopeful that what I lifted up for your consideration is that what we do in classrooms has every bit to do with who we are, how we lean in, the work that we are willing to do so that we might create more spaces for our students. And with that, I am going to pause here and use the last 4 minutes of our time together for questions and answers.
Dr. Williams, you have a question in the chat. It's from Jenna. How do we support the work around these concepts given the FCPS focus on SEL as the answer to students' needs? How do we as advocates support your framing?
So what I want to answer this question in actually two parts, and I want to invite Mary Jo to kind of speak from her perspective as a person who sits in the space that has direct responsibility for this work. But what I would say from the perspective of the CEO is that the training that we are going to be doing, as well as the training that ECR was doing prior to my arrival, has these tenets of SEL implicitly involved in the training that we do for adults. So if I could lift up even the last module that the ECR team did across the division, they were talking about belonging, right, and connectedness, which at its heart has everything to do with relational skills. It has everything to do with social awareness, right? So much of equity work, and quite frankly, anti-racism work that is rooted in anti-racism and anti-bias, has these ideas as implicit components of them. So I would say that. I know there are other. Leona is on, so Leona, if you want to add, feel free. And then Mary Jo, if you want to talk about that from your perspective, I invite you as well.
I think you did a good job framing that idea of us beginning to shift to elevating the sense of belonging as if not more important than our academic success. And so when you ask the question, Jenna, about like what can you do as advocates, is continue to pose questions around how we're making sure that this is a priority for our division, the same way in which we sometimes over glorify gaps in academics. We need to be thinking about relationships and belonging and what are the barriers to that. And so I think Dr. Williams did a great job this evening kind of setting some framework around how you bring your presence, your being with you, and how I think about as a mom, thank you for sharing that when you talk to your 4-year-old son, how you're helping him be aware of himself as a being. And I don't know if I've done that often as a parent. So that was really thoughtful for me of like helping my own child understand that and advocating that that's part of learning too. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, Jenna, but that's some of my connections I made tonight. Mary Jo, do you want to add in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I do think I agree that the community sense, the community building, I think I spoke a little bit, I really can't stress enough. I feel like it's a collaborative work that we do together, and that relationship building is it's a collective work, right? So not only collaborative, but it's collective. And that's why I love the Castle's framing, because it brings out that collective, impact to really show how, one teacher can't do it alone. I mean, one can. So the tenets of social emotional learning is really wrapping those rings, and not only in the home, school, community partnerships that we have around the center of our student learning. And I really like that. I think, Dr. Williams, you said it very well. I do think bringing your presence and for that student to have that strong belonging. That's why I like a lot of the, we do a lot of modeling circles with our students, and they have to have that sense of belonging within the community. They're either of their peers, the community of, maybe it's a after school even community program. We do some after school supports and works with our centers. But I really like the belonging piece. In order to have students available for the learning, the social emotional skill sets, they have to have a sense of belonging within the school community, within their neighborhood community. So that's essential.
Well, and if I could, so thank you all for interjecting, right? Because this is actually not different or disconnected from how we try to encourage diversity in staffing and in the construction of belonging. See, this is what I mean actually in taking a framing that oftentimes feels theoretical, and it feels like we're just talking about what needs to happen with children, and not appreciate how to such a large degree the struggles that young people may have around some of these things, we're not doing the best job of modeling. So what happens so even right now, right, I have to get used to and develop some capacity around being mindful of my communication style, because we have an interpreter who needs to access me. Now I can do a couple of things. I can problematize the fact that I need to change, or I can lean in and say, if I really am about inclusion, if I really do want an inclusive environment, then when I am doing a thing that is having an impact that is unintended, that I got to look at my behavior, right? And that all gets back to this question of how we take this framing and make it operative rather. So thank you all for lifting those things up, because then it allows us to make those connections between adult culture and then what ultimately becomes our school culture. I can't see the chat, so if there are other questions.
I don't see any more. I think this was a great way to introduce yourself informally to the group. We appreciate this and just the collaborative spirit embodied in this discussion itself. I felt that based on, how it was moving, that we didn't really need a breakout session tonight. I think, taking a step back and looking at how we have to approach this, starting with ourselves, I think that was the right pitch.
Well, and I will tell you that I appreciate being in this community tonight, and don't anticipate that this will be our last opportunity to have conversations, and certainly we'll take the feedback that you would offer about the things that we're doing well, the things that we can do better. And so I just appreciate the partnership and moving forward.
Thank you very much. So our last topic, and I wasn't sure whether it'd be able to get the support and help of Dr. Sujatha Hampton, who's the education chair of the NAACP's Fairfax branch. There was a letter that went out last week, and rather than me try to go through it, it's always great to hear from the source. So she will slowly, giving time for our interpreter, and briefly kind of summarize the purpose of the letter, where the advocacy is at this point, and how it relates to the work of our committee, and how we can support it. Dr. Hampton?
Hi. Let me see if I can share video. Can you see me? Hi, everybody.
Yes, we can see you.
So I just came from 2 back-to-back things, and I don't have a presentation for you. I'm happy. I don't know if anybody has yet read the letter. If I need to present the letter, Mike, how would you like me to use the remainder of your time? I don't know how much even time. I don't know when you end either. I want to be mindful.
I think that it's best to just summarize at a high level, because everybody, it was in the email that went out today, and so you could just speak to it. Folks can always go back.
Well, I understand people are busy, and it's very hard sometimes. You get all the attachments on the day and you're just rushing to the meeting. So I'll just give you just some highlights here. So the NAACP on the 6th of April, last week, we sent Dr. Braybrand a letter. Dr. Williams was included on that, and Sloan Presidio, and we sent it to the board as well. And then the day after, we just put it out into the public to share. And it was a letter where we are asking staff, we're asking the school system to change the way that they teach reading, because there is a well-developed science that defines the way the brain learns to read, which is quite different from the way the brain learns to speak. And that is through explicit systematic instruction of making the connections between sounds and letters, basically. And that we were asking that in Tier 1 instruction, meaning in general classroom instruction, K3, that literacy instruction be taught in this systematic way. Right now, what's happening in FCPS is balanced literacy. And balanced literacy, I don't want to give you a long history here, but back when I became a reading specialist, we used to use whole word, which was basically an attempt to become less reductive, so to speak, sort of a more constructive framing and higher level. It seemed like it was just such a great idea that we would expose children to all the beauty of language, and in doing that, we would awaken their excitement about literacy, and they would happily read. And what happened instead is that children began to not be able to read well, because about 30% of kids easily read without any any systematic explicit instruction. You may have children who themselves, or you yourself, just you don't remember ever having learned to read. It was not difficult. Your children, it wasn't difficult for them, so you didn't even know this was a thing. You're among that lucky 30%. But 60 to 80, I think they say, percent of kids don't learn to read that way, and they need the systematic instruction. And remaining children can be, really have reading difficulties and need a much higher dosage of that same type of instruction, explicit, systematic instruction. So what we were asking is, could we just switch it to the way that the brain learns to read? Because everybody can learn to read with structured literacy, and only some kids can learn to read with balanced literacy. And what tends to happen is that children who come to school less ready to learn will have a much harder time of that. They're not exposed to pre-K programs very often. Their families very often don't have the money to supplement the poor reading instruction that is happening, because right now, I mean, the thing is that this number of kids that doesn't learn to read via the methods we are using, they're across the gamut. Rich kids, poor kids, Black kids, white kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids, all the kids. You may think that this is only a problem for some people, but it's not. But families who have the means spend sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to supplement what FCPS does in teaching and reading. And so for years, for 12 years, I think there has been a correspondence with FCPS asking them to do this, showing this is not new research, this is long known research, and that just hasn't happened. So we decided to take it on at the NAACP, because it does impact Black and Hispanic children the worst. There is a standing 20-point achievement gap, and that's why actually presenting to the TPAC is important, that you guys should know that. I don't know how many of you know that Title I is a federal grant that actually exists to close the achievement gap. That was the original purpose of Title I. And so I was talking to Mike about this, that not only is this right in your wheelhouse, this is right in your wheelhouse. Beyond that, it is it is the fundamental core mission of Title I. So really what you should consider asking when you make your report is regular, ongoing, maybe bi-yearly, like twice a year, getting reports on your literacy in your schools. There are 41 Title I schools, and it would be really great if you asked staff to provide you the information, to look into that and provide it back to you, so you can keep track of it, and that is like sort of why I'm here. The letter that we've written, we have a lot of support for it, and so we wrote this long letter. It's if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's super informative, and at the end we have it all referenced, so it's all of our citations are there. But there's a shorter letter, which I don't know if it's been shared with you. It's a sort of joint coalition statement. And, I understand you guys are a school board advisory committee. I don't know whether you guys do that, like sign on to joint statements. But it would be worth looking at, because what I'm asking staff to do, what I'm asking FCPS to do, is going to be a very heavy lift. It is very hard to do that, to change your instructional model, especially when teachers have been they have been educated in this. So whole language, which is the way it was when I became a reading specialist in the 90s, but then it changed into balanced literacy, and it became balanced literacy because it was whole language and you put some phonics in there, because everybody realized the kids aren't learning to read. It was failing. I learned that to read. I learned that the hard way, because here I go graduating and I'm teaching in DC public schools, I'm teaching very severely, it was called serious emotional disturbance in kids with behavior disorders, and lots of emotional trauma, lots and lots of trauma-informed instruction there. And they didn't know how to read. And so what I was taught was not going to teach these kids how to read. So I learned really fast that I needed to specifically teach them these sound letter connections. And so I learned it on my own, cobbled together, I have it over there, cobbled together a bag of stuff that I put together because they weren't even making materials like this. You had to go hunting for them in teacher stores, you know. And so then they got to balanced literacy. They threw the stuff in. And now here we are. We've known for a long time that this is not the way the brain learns to read. So that's what we're doing in FCPS, balanced literacy, all over, everywhere, everywhere. Teachers posting on Twitter, and it's not really their fault because that's what they learned. So what we really need is for the school system to fully embrace their scores, because if you've noticed, I mean, I'll be very gentle about it, but when you've noticed our superintendent, when he presents data, when anybody presents data from FCPS, they focus on the gains and they don't focus on the losses. They focus on the gains and you don't focus on the losses. What happens is you've lost all the meat of the information. When you're running a school system, you need to know who did it succeed. You need to know who did it pass, who didn't, you know, who didn't graduate. You know, 84% of the kids who don't graduate in FCPS are English language learners. That's unacceptable. But if we always focus on, oh, our graduation rate is 8, whatever it is, then you miss all of that data. The information is who didn't pass. And also remember, if we're looking at SOL data, first place, it's a very low benchmark that we all know for literacy. But beyond that, he will show a table or like a bar graph, and it'll be like the blue part is the kids who passed and the yellow part is the kids who failed. But if you get 399, you failed, and you get 401, you passed, but neither one of those kids can read. When we're talking about literacy, we need to be talking at least pass advanced, right? But we don't look at that because having poor reading, it doesn't help you access the world. And so the way the NAACP framed it is as a human rights violation. That's what it is. When we know we can do better and we don't do better, it's on us, right? And when that not doing better causes you poorer health, less wealth, less safety, and everything that you can get in the world is so much less than it could be if you could read, you know, there's a problem there. So that was the reason that Mike suggested that I come and talk to you guys, because Title I really is all about that achievement gap. That's what the purpose of Title I is. So Title I Parent Advisory Committee really ought to be asking.
And can you clarify when you say achievement gap? Because I know there's opportunity gap. You also say it's not just opportunity, it's achievement.
Well, yeah. So like, you know, we can say all we want because we all know, you know, school is a racist system. We already know that. We know that kids are trash. We know the outcomes are not the same. We already know that. Everybody knows that. But that opportunity, like the fact that you can't, like if you live in certain communities, your extracurriculars, your after school activities will be so much less enriched than in other places, right? We have school segregation by zip code here. We have school segregation via AAP. You certainly have to know that. So we have all of those structures in place. Those are opportunity gaps for sure. But then we also have an achievement gap that shows that, you know, within income brackets, African American students do tend to do more poorly than white students. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that anything about the Black student. We also know that so much racism in school. We know there's so many discipline issues. We know that Black kids are disciplined so much more and spend so much more time suspended out of school, all of that. We know there are a lot of differences, but the test scores also don't look the same, you know, so that's an achievement gap. And we don't know, you can't explain what it is, but nonetheless it is, that the actual scores do not look the same. Now, the tests may be racist. I'm not saying anything about that. What I'm saying though is what I would like is that the school system uses a system to teach reading that actually teaches reading, and then let's look at the achievement gap. Frankly, here's what I really think. I think that you should not be allowed to say that a child has a behavior disorder until you try to teach him to read, and you can show us with fidelity that you implemented this with fidelity. If you can show us you implemented it with fidelity and the child still has this behavior disorder diagnosis, okay, maybe he does. But maybe he doesn't, because I can say that in my experience teaching kids, there's only one child that I wasn't able to teach how to read, and all the children I did teach how to read, all of them had their SED, their behavior disorder diagnosis dropped, and they were just LD, like they just had an LD. And the difference between having an LD and having behavior disorder, marker on your life is very different. But what if before we put any markers on kids, we made sure we tried with fidelity to use the best science available to us to teach a child to read? I don't understand, nor do I care at all about the feeling of grown adults who are paid to do this work, who don't do this work because it's difficult to change a system over. I don't have a lot of patience for that myself. So that's what the ask was. No, I don't have a presentation. So if you have other questions, anybody can send it, ask me whatever you want to ask. I don't know how best you want to handle that.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lisa Felder. I am in the Title I office. I'm an educational specialist. And we appreciate you coming to share on your behalf. I also want to share, this is my experience as a former reading specialist in Fairfax County and working in a Title I school. I would like to share just some positive things that have occurred in working with students. Especially, I worked in a school on Route 1, and there have been students who have come through who I've supported, who have gone on to do great things. I have taught them I've supported them in their reading development. I've supported teachers in building their capacity, and as they support children and other teachers. And so I do want to just share a balance of what has happened in Fairfax County as a whole and the support that has taken place as reading specialists working in the county, how there have been great gains for students who have made it, who have grown and who have gone on to do wonderful things, high school, college, other things. We have developed their leadership, helped them to think critically about text. And so I just want you to think, I just want you to just want to share that there are some really wonderful things that are happening in Fairfax County, and the hard work that teachers do and working with all students. Do we have areas to grow? Absolutely. Are we stretched in thinking in our learning and developing of literacy? Absolutely. But I do want to share with friends and members of TPAC who are on this call, just to hear both sides of the story and to understand that, yes, we know that this letter has been presented, and also to know that there are good things that are happening as well. I just wanted to share that point as a former reading specialist and literacy coach. So thank you for your time.
I appreciate that, and I see that Courtney White has also said the blanket statements made about that not apply to all teachers. I didn't say any. I mean, I didn't mean that. If I hurt anybody's feelings here, I'm sorry about that. I'm talking about a system that the school system uses to teach reading, and the system that the school system uses to teach reading is balanced literacy, without a doubt. It says it on the website. I have numerous email exchanges with leadership that indicate for sure, without a doubt, that there's balanced literacy. And again, like I said, many students can learn to read. 30% of students can learn easily with balanced literacy, like my own two children, like myself. So the issue is not, and as also, like, I'd like to reiterate, I do understand that teachers work very hard and that teachers are very earnest and teachers are very much doing exactly what they're taught. Like I was when I went out there to teach students as a reading specialist, to teach students with whole language, like with whole language. And I'm just doing the best I can, even though that's the system. and realizing it failed and trying to figure something else out, which I'm sure that that many students, many teachers did. And when I was the Title I coordinator in Albemarle County Public Schools, you know, it was still a balanced literacy model for sure, because that's what we were operating under. But what we did then, letters instruction came. I don't remember what letter stands for. And so I sent a bunch of teachers to get trained in letters, because our that was the first year. When I was the Title I coordinator of Albemarle County Public Schools, it was the first year of No Child Left Behind. So all of a sudden we had to report out, right? We had to actually collect the data by subgroup, which of course you all know that now. We had to look at the data by subgroup. And at that time, no one had, here's the thing, the kicker. Title I money was being, billions and billions of dollars of federal money was being sent out to school divisions to close the achievement gap, right? But because no one was looking at it, that money was used for all kinds of different things. It was misappropriated. I wouldn't even say it wasn't that it was nefariously misappropriated necessarily, though sometimes it was. It was just sent to other things, right? When we finally looked, that was like say 2002, we looked at the data, and Black pass rates of the SOL, reading SOL, were 29%, and white pass rates were something in the 90s. Actually, let me see if I can put this in the, I'll try to put something in the chat for you guys to look at, so that you can see what I'm talking about here. Let me see if I can share this with you. That's something really interesting to look at, because the University of Virginia has changed its educational model now for teaching reading under the direction of Emily Solari, who was brought on board to do that. So right now, the flagship university of the state, of the Commonwealth, has completely shifted to structured literacy, because balanced literacy works for some kids, as I'm sure you were able to make some kids, you know, read. I'm not doubting that, Ms. Felder or Ms. White. I'm not saying that nobody was taught to read, you know. I'm saying that all brains learn to read with structured literacy, and only some learn with balanced literacy. The link I just dropped in there is it's a tool that they built at UVA with the Equity Center, where you can put in your division, and you can look at the data from 2011, I think, until the last year that we have, the 2019. And there's a 20% gap. And so what I'm saying is not that some children didn't learn to read. Obviously, many children learn to read. What I'm saying is that Black children and Hispanic children learn to read at far less rates, like 20% percentage points less. And that should be objectionable to all of us. And so even if teachers are doing really great things, and I'm sure, again, many teachers are, and I am a teacher, you know, and I was a Title I teacher, and I was a Title I coordinator, and I have a doctorate in special education with a focus in emotional disturbance and learning disabilities. And I have done this work for a long time, so I do not disparage any teacher's work here. That is not my goal. My goal is to convince the school system to shift its paradigm to the paradigm that supports all children learning to read. And only then, once we've done that, should we be able, then we could at least try to close the achievement gap. Working on literacy is the thing we can do that would have the most immediate and largest impact on the achievement gap. And in doing that, if we've taught all these children to read, then we have offered them the universe. And right now, by doing things where only some of the kids are learning to read, we are denying that universe, because not all of these kids that I'm talking about have the money to supplement when the school system doesn't provide what they need with regard to literacy. Thank you, Ms. Danner. I agree.
Thank you.
Mashika, you have a question?
I think we have a hand. I'm sorry. I think we have a hand.
Yes, this is Mashika Davis-Smith, and I think there may have been some clarification. So, Doctor, thank you so much for being here tonight. Education and literacy training and models of literacy training are definitely not my specialty. And I was going to ask you to break it down. I usually say to this to people I work with, whether they be PhDs in economics or lawyers for regulatory securities regulation. I said, if I'm 12, please explain what you're saying. But I think I'm going to reflect back to you, like we're in therapy together in a relationship. You're saying the model that our school system is using is not inclusive enough. It is skewed towards the majority population, but you believe with a different model, we can get more of our student population, including Hispanic, Asian, Black, Native. If I'm missing something, I'm sorry, to be able to learn at a higher percentage rate that is more equivalent across the board. So your argument, am I correct that your argument is you're here tonight to say we need to change the way we approach teaching literacy?
Was that, you done? Was that the question?
That's the first question. Yeah, I'm not done. Of course I'm not
Okay, okay. I'll answer that first.
done. Wait, I'm
So
12.
you're 12.
Words.
You're 12. You're 12. So yes, what the Fairfax NAACP is proposing, or what we're not proposing, what we're asking
Uh-huh.
is that FCPS fundamentally overhaul.
Oh my God, those are too big.
Fundamentally overhaul?
At 12,
Okay.
don't make me wake my boy up.
Okay, I'll go again. What we are asking FCPS to do is to change the way that, yes, to change the way we teach reading, yes, to a system that teaches, that systematically, explicitly.
I'm gonna call you out.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking to 12-year-olds, Mashika, so you gotta work with me.
Because the thing is, I get overwhelmed when I'm listening to you. I get overwhelmed by all the
My big words.
I'm translating.
I'm sorry, I do tend to do that. I apologize. Okay, so here's the thing. The brain learns to read via explicit instruction, like clear instruction, that these letters make these sounds. This letter here will make this sound. If you put it at the end, it makes this sound. The brain learns to read, the brain learns to decode via that method, that it is connecting letter sounds to letters.
Okay.
In specific order, that it is learning that way. That is the way that we are cognitively, that our brains learn to read. The brain learns to read via a system that is called, that then it is named structured literacy.
Okay. And so what is your organization doing to help support our school system to change our approach?
Well, we're offering whatever support that we could possibly think of. I mean, we are just an advocacy organization, a 100% volunteer advocacy organization.
And I appreciate that all day. Thank you.
So what I'm saying is, what we've done, we wrote this letter. I am in, like, I mean, if Dr. Williams is still on here, she can attest to the fact that it is like on the daily, I am sending as much information, demanding, as making demands of the school system, because the thing is that when it has been allowed to go on for so many decades, so though I appreciate so much the hard work of teachers, we can say that we're teaching something, we've had successes, we've had so many successes, and so I want to also share the other side. When you say we, I also want to share the other side. That is like, that argument that we want to share the other side is like looking at that yellow part, or whatever the part is of the graph where everybody passed. But if you don't look at the other part, a lot of people are left behind. That is what I'm saying. This is actually, structured literacy is the way to teach kids with dyslexia. Our joints, and I'm answering Jenna White's question now, that
That's
because
fine.
I'm sorry?
I said I saw Jenna White's question, and
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful to hear this too, because dyslexic brains are wired in a particular way. They have actually done, here's the interesting thing, they have actually done PET scan research. They have actually done MRI research of the brain learning of reading. And we already know that this is the way it learns to read. So this is the way, Jenna, that they teach kids with dyslexia.
Doctor, what's a PET scan?
Oh, it is, I forget what it stands for. It's like a brain scan, like, it's like, I don't remember what the letters stand for right now. It's not going to come to me. But, you know, when they put you in a thing and they scan your brain, and so they can ask you to do things, like they can flash things, they can make you read stuff, they can make you think about stuff and see what's lighting up in your brain. And that's how you kind of, that plus a million other ways is how you know how the brain is doing various things. Dyslexic brains tend to be wired because certain parts are not working the way that there's a miswiring, and so the reading can happen in different ways than sort of, yeah, like that. But the brain is using other parts of itself to solve a problem in dyslexic brains. However, structured literacy works for them too, which is why the joint letter is signed by also by Decoding Dyslexia. The joint letter, the joint.
Dr. Williams was going to jump. I think was going to add something too.
Oh,
please.
And I heard you tag me in, and I just want to kind of lift something up that I think is really important, because equity work best done is not about either this or that, but it is about both and. Because one of the things we know is that strategies that we are using that are working for students, and we have the evidence and the data that the students are progressing, are not things that we would discontinue. But the question is really around challenging ourselves, for which that is not the case. And in many ways, what Dr. Hampton is talking about is really what our tier 1 instruction should look like, to create the fewest gaps possible, because it is based on the physiological science of how the body and the brain learns to read. Now, what we know from the research is that some brains can't hear phonemes, so they need syllables, and some kids won't learn that. So there'll be exceptions. There's no method that is 100% universal, but the question is, based on the evidence, what really should be the core, and then how do we build from there? And certainly the question is never how do we discontinue things that are working well and students are thriving in a given space. I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you. So you're advocating for a more inclusive method for increasing literacy. I'm going to say, before you answer that, I'm absolutely shocked as a parent of a 6th grader and a 2nd grader sitting in Fairfax County, one of the most wealthy counties in the nation. But we're talking about literacy in 2021, when we have the curiosity and the perseverance running around on Mars. You know what? Nothing else to say. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, so can you share what the next steps would be for? I think we'll take the last question from Jenna, and then
structured literacy. I'm sorry. Right.
No, it's just Jenna's question. If you could read it, then that'll be the last question.
Structured literacy has 5 parts, Jenna. Phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So it's just all the stuff. But the first thing you would do, right, that phonics is the connection of these of letters to the sounds they make, and structured literacy is the whole thing that has all of that stuff, right? But when we have balanced literacy, we're spending way too much time on things that are requiring children to do things like, for example, and this is happening here too, guessing, looking at the first letter. Yes, and that is actually, if you were to look at the letter, it is it's referenced, it's hyperlinked in there in the back with our references, that National Reading Panel research. And you can just go get lost in there. It's really interesting stuff. So what's happening is that there's a thing that in balanced literacy that people are asked to do where it really is kind of based on this, that you're doing a lot of guessing. So you'll see, let's say, for example, the word goat, and you'll see the letter G, and you don't know what goat says, so the teacher will say, what's the first letter? Do you see, and look at the pictures? Guess, right? And so what happens is guessing can only carry you so far, but by the time you get to the place where the learning is coming at you much faster, and by that time you needed to be much more fluid with your reading, but you are guessing and you don't have any pictures anymore as you get older, obviously, and you're just sort of at a loss. So it's not just a rebrand at all, Jenna, it's just that, we have more science now. There's a lot of stuff we know now that we didn't used to know. And about that we can prove now, that we might have always thought that teaching a child explicitly by phonics was the better way to do it. Now you have a lot of proof that that's the better way to do it, and they have a lot of better stuff. It's much less boring than if you were about my age. They used to teach you stuff like that all the time, and it used to be really boring. And if you didn't get it quick, it was boring. You were stuck with boring stuff. It doesn't have to be boring anymore. There are ways to do all of this that it's not boring, but believe me, when a child is able to read, then the world becomes a whole lot more exciting. And for families who can't supplement, to have outside tutors teaching that for their kids, it does become an equity issue very quickly. So
Williams had something else, I think.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this point, but the question that was asked by Ms. Davis Smith, I think, and I appreciate your incredulity. I do. And coming from another division, what I can tell you is that there is a connection with colleges and universities and teacher prep programs that is exacerbating this challenge. Because in many ways, teachers that are coming through prep programs in elementary schools don't get the training that school personnel assume that they do. And then the school divisions often don't have the structured engagement to offset what we perceive folks are getting in teacher prep programs. So this thing gets surfaced in weird ways. And I can only say that because I've been in several divisions where very similar things that are happening now here have happened in those places. So I just wanted to offer that up as a gap that is creating some of this problem.
That is absolutely the case. That is absolutely the case. Like, so I can tell you right now, because I've been doing a lot of work with UVA in thinking about this and framing this and trying to figure out what we can do. Yeah, and I told you earlier that UVA has changed its whole pedagogical paradigm with regard to teaching reading. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it like that. They're completely changing the way that they are teaching reading, but other colleges are having a much harder time, and they're digging in. The reason being that the people who are running their programs, they were taught the way I was taught with whole language or balanced literacy, and so they're just like it's very difficult. They're very emotionally wed to this, because I think on some level a teacher has to feel like if you didn't get this and you've been doing this all this time and you're realizing that harm was done, it hurts. It hurts as a teacher to think that you could have been doing something better for your child, but you didn't know any better. And I understand getting your back up. I understand getting hurt, feeling hurt. I understand feeling like, well, what are you saying? I've been doing this for 30 years. What do you mean? I understand that, like that feeling getting in the way of doing this work. Like, it's the same thing when we were, if you're talking about race, like, what are you saying? Are you saying that I'm a racist? Are you saying that I've been doing racist things? I was doing my very best. I didn't know. Or misgendering students, or things like that, that you didn't realize at the time that was something you were doing and that it was hurting, and then you can get your back up. I get that, but nonetheless, every year that goes by that we don't shift the paradigm, that's another how many thousand kids? 19,000 kids, I believe, failed the SOL in 2019, failed the reading SOL. That's 19,000 kids, but you're going to hear them talk about how many kids passed. 80-something% passed. 80-something% passed and 20-something% didn't, right? So we have to think about it like that. We always have to be looking at who didn't pass. I think I'm talking like way too long, Mike.
So what is the next? So what is the next step? We had questions. People just wanted to keep talking. So what are the next steps, and you know, where is it that
I'll
we
tell
can
you.
be involved?
I'll tell you. I am talking to Dr. Brabrand, Dr. Presidio, Dr. Williams almost every day. We're exchanging emails. Dr. Presidio, it is hard. They're dug in. There's a resource sink here. You have a lot of people that you'd have to retrain. I honestly think that you could roll something like this out the same way that you rolled out the way that they rolled out full day kindergarten. They started it the schools with highest risk populations, and they moved to schools with least risk populations, and they rolled out full day kindergarten. Right, that was a whole big thing to do too. It took a long time, but this requires professional development. It is not easy to make a change like this, but we're asking them to do something that is not easy because the job is the job. The job is to teach all the kids, and if 19,000 kids did not pass the SOL in whatever grade or whatever, that's in whatever year, that is what I care about. I don't actually care about the rest of it nearly as much as I care about, like, let's not do any more harm, let's do this right now. So where we are is I'm never ending communications with them, trying to get them to move it, but anything we can do. You can write to them. You can write to the school board. You are a school board advisory committee. You can write your own letter that just even if you don't have the expertise on the committee to have that letter, you could endorse our letter. You could sign on to our joint statement if you're allowed to do that. You could just say clearly there's a science of reading. You could do a little bit of the research, dig into that stuff that's referenced in the back of our letter, and do a little bit of research on it. You can write your own letter. The school board, I don't know if they scheduled a work session already. Did they do that today, Jenna? I know that they have a forum topic on June 22nd. But I spoke to Megan McLaughlin or somebody. I don't remember who I was talking to actually. It's possible that we could move this up. And also, it doesn't really need board vote. It's an operational. Yeah, June 22nd is the forum topic. It's an operational decision. So staff can just decide to do it. The issue is the implementation, which is not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. I don't think it's easy. It's not. It's not. But you can't just keep on doing the thing that's allowing so many thousands and thousands and thousands of kids not to learn to read. So you might as well just do the right thing and move in the direction. They've already done it, and Arlington County Public Schools has started to do it. It is rough because the teachers still have to be trained, but they're already seeing gains. They're already seeing progress in doing that. So it's not that we can't do it. We have to just go ahead and do it. You just have to go ahead and do it. It's something. It's just really hard. And so what you guys can do definitely is, first place, I also really think that just on the regular, you should be asking asking for presentations on reading, on the state of literacy in Title I schools. You guys have 41 schools. You could just, on these 41 schools, you should have a by grade breakdown of pass rates with all of the data that they have, not just SOL data, but like iReady data. Yes, it is needed. For sure it's needed. So but they have iReady. Teachers are often not trained how to interpret iReady data, but that can, you should be trained to do that so that you have all the tools at your hand. And if you saw SCFT wrote a letter in support of our letter, and they wrote their own letter, and what they insisted on is that teachers be given the tools that they need to do their job with the greatest efficacy. There is no teacher who goes into this that doesn't want the students to learn. I mean, it feels terrible to be a teacher your kids don't learn. It's miserable. It makes your stomach hurt. You can't sleep at night. It's my first year teaching, I broke out in this weird rash. It was like armadillo skin on the side of my face because I had these kids. Of course, they had big problems. They were very difficult to teach, but they also couldn't read. And it was just tearing I couldn't believe that I had been trained to teach and didn't know how to teach them how to read. It was heartbreaking. Here I am. I'm so young, and it was just terrible. It was just terrible. See, because she worked so hard with him to pass, and he didn't pass. Teachers don't want to feel like that. There is no teacher who doesn't want to be able to do their job as well as they can. So FCFT they said, can we want our teachers to have all the tools that they need. I don't see any teacher not wanting to do their job as well as they can. So even if there are some successes, I think that teachers want there to be, more successes, and and to use methodology that will result in the most successes. So I'm really honestly not trying to hurt anybody's feelings or get anybody's back up. And I'll tell you today, I'm sure I missed, it's a very exhausting day, right? So I'm emotionally depleted right now. I've been on all these calls and I was so on edge waiting for that verdict. And when the verdict came, I had to get on a call. I wasn't even able to cry with relief. So I feel right now, honestly, exhausted and depleted. But I mean, I'm just here to say to you, and maybe I'm not being as diplomatic as I might otherwise be, but there are things you can do. You can ask, you can demand better for your kids, especially from Title I. Title I kids, the whole purpose of Title I is to close the achievement gap. That is the purpose of that grant money. That is the purpose of that grant money. And so you are in the best situation. You're the best advisory committee to ask for this, because it is money designated for your schools that you have oversight over to close that achievement gap. And the way to close that achievement gap is to make sure that everybody can learn to read, as many people as you can catch. You may not catch everybody, but you'll catch a heck of a lot more using cognitive research-based methods.
Thank you, Dr. Hampton.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz.
So very briefly, just let everyone know our next final meeting will be May 11th, which is, we'll be going through the school board report and think about planning for the next year as well as elections. So look out for your emails. There will be some actions to be taken offline in between now and then. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I know we went a little long, but I mean, this is really the purpose of what we're doing. It's to support our kids and families, and sometimes the discussion does have to go a little long, but I appreciate all support from the Title I office and Dr. Williams, Dr. Hampton, Mary Jo, and everybody else. Please fill out the reflection ticket on the right. Click that and fill that out. And everybody have a good evening, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. It's very informative. And thank you, Ms. Hampton. Thank you for encapsulating that letter. It was a long read, and this make a lot of sense. Hey, Mike, are you still there?
I am.
Or Yvonne?
I'm here.
Yvonne or Mike. Sorry, just refresh me. When is the date of the next executive board meeting?
Next Tuesday.
Next
27th.
27th. Got it. Thank you. Okay. See you.